Hi, Mrs. Smith. I'm Lori, the client care representative from Dr. Doolittle's clinic. I understand that your 15-year-old quarter horse mare, Ruby, is not eating well, and that is a concern. So I definitely think that she needs to have a wellness check done by one of our vets. In my notes, it looks like you are concerned that Ruby may be ill because she doesn't have a gallbladder, and that's not the case. Horses and other equids evolved to not have a gallbladder. So let's in general talk about what a gallbladder is and how it plays a role in digestion and what its function is. And then we'll talk about why horses don't have one. So a gallbladder is a tiny pear-shaped organ that's inferior to the liver, or kind of underneath where the liver is in your body or your dog's body. I see here that you are also asking if your dog needs a gallbladder, and while it's beneficial, they don't need one to survive. We'll talk about that in a minute. Gallbladders evolved in carnivores like cats and snakes, and in omnivores like humans and dogs to store excess bile produced by the liver. So carnivores and omnivores eat meat, which is very high in fat. And so the liver produces bile, which is just this substance that contains bile salts, bilirubin, cholesterol, fatty acids, a phospholipid called lecithin, and enzymes like lipase, amylase, and protease, all of which help emulsify or break down lipids during digestion so those fats can be absorbed by the body for use. So when more bile is produced by the liver than what is needed in the moment by the animal, then that excess bile is stored in the gallbladder, and it's there to use later when the dog or the person eats a meal that's really high in fats. That bile can be released and help digest that high fatty meal. Dogs can go for hours or even days without eating. And if no food is in the digestive system, that bile isn't needed because there's no fat to digest. So it's stored in the gallbladder. And then later on down the road, when the dog eats or when it eats a particularly high fatty meal, that gallbladder releases bile into the small intestine, and it's used to break down the fats for absorption into the body. So while the gallbladder is beneficial and useful for your dog, it can actually live without one. And I say this because you might be thinking, oh, I know people who've had their gallbladders removed and they're eating and living just fine. Yes, that is true. So the dog can live without a gallbladder, although it might have to modify its diet to eat fewer fatty foods. So without a gallbladder, the dog's liver is going to still continually produce bile. And with nowhere to store the excess bile, what's going to happen is neurotransmitters and hormones are eventually going to signal the liver to slow the rate of bile production down, especially during times of fasting. So the overall amount of bile produced by the liver over the dog's lifetime may be reduced. And if it were to eat a food particularly high in fat, it's not going to have that excess bile that was stored in the gallbladder to call upon when it needs it. So now that brings us to, does your horse need a gallbladder, or why doesn't your horse have one? Well, horses evolve without a gallbladder and don't need one because they are herbivores, which means that they eat plants, and plants are very low in fat. In addition to that, horses are grazers. They spend 16 to 20 hours a day consistently taking in small amounts of forage at a time. This is also known as trickle feeding. So there's constantly food trickling through your horse's digestive tract. It should never actually be empty. The digestive system in a horse is adapted to continuously have food in it. So the bile produced by the liver is continuously flowing into the small intestine to aid in the digestion of what low amounts of fats are in the plant matter that the horse is eating. But since the stomach and the small intestine is never empty, the bile is always working on something to digest whatever amounts of fats are there. You might already be able to see how this contrasts with the dog's digestive system and what the dog eats. A horse's diet consists of plant material, which is low in fat. It's ingested during the majority of a 24-hour period, which results in the digestive tract always having some amount of food in it. While a dog's diet consists not just of plant matter, but a large portion of the dog's diet is animal protein or meat, which is really high in fat. So dogs eat relatively large meals with periods of intermittent fasting. And so at times the dog's digestive tract may not contain any food at all. So the horse will continuously be using bile that's produced by the liver to digest any fats that are present in the food they ingest, while dogs benefit from a place to store excess bile for later use when their digestive system is empty.